The My.Application object returns information about the running application. It has an Open Forms property, and you can use that to get a list of all of the forms that are currently open. There's a splash screen property that you can use to know what the application is going to use as the splash screen. You can also set this, so you could change splash screens at runtime if you needed to. You can also set or retrieve the amount of time the splash screen is going to be displayed, and that's the minimum splash screen display property. Now you can of course set the splash screen at design time, but you could also, in the initialization of the application, change it. So maybe you display a different splash screen during beta or production, or maybe the splash screen changes on Fridays. You do have the flexibility of changing that using the My.Application object. My.Application.info is going to retrieve information about the application's assembly. And most of this information you're going to set at design time. So if you go into the application page of the project designer, you can access the assembly information dialog box. You enter information there about the assembly, and then you can get to all of that information using My.Application.info. And specifically, the assembly name property of My.Application.info returns the name of the assembly, minus the extension, of course. You can get the company name, the copyright, the description, the product name, the title, the trademark, the version. All of this information can be entered in the assembly information dialog, and all of it can be retrieved at runtime using My.Application.info. You can also get the directory path, which tells you where the application is running in. Loaded assemblies will return a list of loaded assemblies. So you do in the .NET Framework have the ability to load assemblies on demand. Typically any assembly you reference is loaded when the application starts, but you can load them on demand, and you could use loaded assemblies to see if an assembly is already loaded. If you use the stack trace property, this will return a list of method calls in reverse order. And working set gives you the amount of physical memory allocated to the application. You can use My.Application.log to write event and exception information to log files. The write entry method is what actually writes the information. And then that information is written not only to the output window, but also to the application's log file. By default, that log file gets created for you, and it's in a subfolder in the user's application data folder. And the structure of that folder is company name, product version. So let's go see a demo of how you can use the My.Application object to get information about the running application. I have the My namespace project open in Visual Studio, and in this demo we're going to look at the My.Application object. And that object gives us information about the running application. We also set information about the application at design time. And in this demo we're going to look at the My.Application object. And that object gives us information about the running application. Some of that information is only available at runtime. Some of that information we set at design time and then can read at runtime. So let's go look at the application information we can set at design time. I'm going to go into the project's properties. This brings up the project designer, and in the application page of the project designer, we can set assembly information. So when I click on this button, here's the assembly information dialog, where I can set the title of the assembly, the description, company, product, copyright, trademark if I want one, and assembly version. And I can read all of that information at runtime. I can also in here determine what I want the splash screen to be. And in this solution, I have two versions of the splash screen, splash screen 1 and splash screen 2. So I'm going to set the splash screen to splash screen 1. And then I'm going to go into the application's events, and in the onInitialize, I'm going to set the minimum splash screen display time property of My.Application to 3000, meaning 3 seconds. The onInitialize event occurs as the application is starting, but before any of the forms appear. and also before the splash screen appears. So I want my splash screen to show up for 3 seconds. And then I also want to change the splash screen if we're in beta. And I want to do this using conditional compilation. So if I've defined this constant beta, then I want Visual Studio to add this following code to my application. My.Application.SplashScreen equals my.Forms.SplashScreen. Forms object is the collection of forms in the application, and Forms.SplashScreen2 is the SplashScreen2 form. I can set conditional compilation on the compile page under Advanced Compile Options. So let's start out setting this to false, so we're not currently in beta. Okay, so now let's run this application. Splash screen 1 shows up. Now I'll click My.Application to bring up the application form. When I click the Application button, I'm going to get a list of the forms that are currently open and the splash screen display time. Let's go check the code for this form and see what's going on. I actually want the My.Application form code. Okay. So when we click the button, we're going to clear out that list box, and then we're going to loop through My.Application.OpenForms. And this is a collection of every form that's currently open. And then we're going to display the name. So I know that the switchboard's open, and I know that My.Application form, which is what we're looking at now, is open. Then I want to display the minimum splash screen display time. Now I set that in the application events, but I can also read that property on the application object. And so we display 3 seconds. Let's get information about the assembly. When I click Assembly, here I'm displaying all of the information that we saw in the Assembly Information dialog. So My.Application.info has a number of properties: assembly name, title, description, company name, product name, copyright, trademark, and then the version. All of that information we saw in the Assembly Information dialog, and we can read all of it by using properties of My.Application.info. Okay, let's shut this down. And in the application events, I said if we're in beta, then change the splash screen. Well, splash screen 1, which is the default splash screen, looks like this. And if we look at the code, we can see that this too uses My.Application.info to get the title of the application, as well as the version and copyright. And that information displays on the splash screen. Splash screen 2 looks the same, but it adds the word beta to the application title. So what I want is an easy way to display beta or not, and I've chosen to do that using conditional compilation. So if we're in beta, then I'm going to come into the compile page, and under Advanced Compile Options, set this custom constant beta to true. Now what happens then is Visual Studio will now compile this line of code into the application and change the splash screen. So now when I run this, as the application runs, we get a different splash screen, and that shows up for 3 seconds. We're also in this application using My.Application.log. And when the application starts up, we're going to call the writeEntry method of My.Application.log to specify that the application was started by the user, my.user.name. My.user refers to me as the current user, and we're also going to display the time using my.computer.clock. And so we're going to write that entry that the application was started by the user at a particular time, and we're going to specify that this is just informational. Then we're going to record when the application shuts down. And then if an unhandled exception occurs, we're going to write that information to the log, and we're going to specify that that's critical information. The write entry method of My.Application.log, as well as write exception, writes to the log file, which is stored in the user's application data folder. So if I come out to C, and we're using Vista here, so this would be under Users, the user, which is AppDev User, then under App Data, and then I look in Roaming. Here's the folder AppDev Products LLC, that's the company, developing applications with Visual Studio 2008, which is the product. The version, 1.0.0.0, and then in there is mynamespace.log, and here's the information that we're logging: when the application was started and when it was shut down. So you've seen in this demo using the My.Application object in the My namespace. And that gives you the ability to read and in a couple of cases change information about the application at runtime.